Good morning and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for coming. A huge thank you to the sponsors of the channel. I really appreciate it, and really I'm continuing to do these videos especially for you guys. I truly do appreciate it. Today we will talk about a few models that sort of caught my attention. It's more different types or styles of models than specifically the individual vessels. This is coming from the exhibition that just closed yesterday at the USS Constitution MUSEUM in Boston. I suppose Charleston, sensu stricto, considering the area. But if you want to see the full range of models and everything that was exhibited there, of course go to the sister channel where the photography of the models has been posted in full blast, the entire collection of photographs. Here I would like to bring to our attention only a couple, just because I found them interesting one way or another. Right, let's begin first with half-hull model. I do like half-hulls. They have certain traditional aspect to them, and yes, it is true that they're mostly 19th century, contrary to what you hear and read in secondary literature. The carving of half-hulls is really a fairly late development. In earlier times, master shipwrights were perfectly capable of producing plans on paper, even for small vessels, rather than here. So there is a certain tradition to half-hull models that makes them attractive. They are subject of collecting, of course. Few original ones are left. They, when available, are available at a rather obnoxious price. This one is a model of a catboat, as we can see. Something, I was going to say typically American, but the truth of the matter is that it is not. Such similar rigs we do see in the Netherlands in the late 16th and 17th century on the inland waters. But what nowadays we understand by a catboat, the short, very tubby-like elongation, 2-to-1 maybe, flat-bottomed centerboard vessels with single gaff mainsail. This is indeed rather American development, and particularly here of New England. Oh, it goes all the way down to New Jersey. This is a very nicely made model, but I was more interested in the style in which not only is the half-hull model represented, but also the rig. This must have been quite a craftsmanship to produce this piece of work. In this group, it is also worth mentioning the Herreshoff H28. I have a certain soft spot for this particular design of Francis Herreshoff. Although, of course, most of all, I like, my favorite one would be the Rocinante. This is a classic, this is so much part of the legendarium of yachting in the Northeast. I have to admit, with much sadness in my voice, that I have never sailed one, but I have seen a few live, including one on the Mystic River, where I frequently sail. Then there is, of course, the group of ships in borrow models, and I have to say that I found some really interesting and nice examples. I was even willing to put up with yet another combination of Columbus's ships, because these do not pretend to be real scale vessels. These are essentially a diorama style. They're showing the Columbus vessels on their crossing of the Atlantic. Except I take issue with the Latin-rigged caravel, because we do know that right before the crossing, on his last stop before crossing the Atlantic in the islands, the first thing that Columbus did was to re-rig all of his ships with square sails and got rid of the lateen fore and aft sails. Of the other one, of particular, of course, The craftsmanship is great on many of these. It is quite an achievement to put model in a bottle. I have done 2 in my wild youth, and I have to say that they would have been an embarrassment in comparison with the ones that I saw at the exhibit. For some of them, the geometry of the sail plans might not have worked quite as well as the original ships would have worked. I'm talking, of course, about Golden Hind, but for the others, it is still beautifully done. The inevitable constitution under full sail in a large bottle certainly deserves attention with the minuscule detail that is added on the vessel. But of this group, by far my favorite one is the one that is rigged like a gun on a gun deck. That is a model of the USS Independence. And it just is a really neat, cool idea. Well done. Original. Fun to look at. And I found myself getting back to looking at it again and again. So among the models in bottles, this is my favorite one in the group. Then inevitably, but again, somehow with models in bottles, it does not upset me as much, is the battle between the Flying Dutchman and Black Pearl from Pirates of the Caribbean. Well done, interestingly put together, and because it is essentially a toy, you do not get up the wall because of the way the ships were represented in the film. And I'm the first one to admit that I enjoy the films too. Looking at the picture of the model of the Flying Cloud, I'm not quite sure whether this is it, whether the modeler intended to represent her unrigged, without masts, or this is simply in work in progress. In my younger days, I loved clipper ships. I was certainly smitten by their beauty and by their history and the briefness of their careers. It was adding quite a lot, and the speed that they showed up. Of course, as my interests and my knowledge of sailing ships expanded, they moved to second, third lane. But this is an interesting ship, and after all, very appropriate. Boston was the grand capital of American clipper ship building, and Flying Cloud is one of the prime examples of Donald McKay's style of construction. The thing is that with these, when they are full hull, unless the rig is there and the spread of the rigging plan, they're so deep in hold that clipper models are always in danger of looking clumsy until you fully rig them. And it is one of those types of vessels that I think I would like to see fully rigged with sails, especially if it is all quality of sails. I'm sure this will be a fantastic model when it is completed. Then, of the smaller scale, there is the clearly Harold Hanna inspired miniature model. Presumably it is intended to be the Hanna, considering that this is America and it is an American modeler and no other place but Boston. Of course it will be the Hanna, what else? Despite the fact that there are better documented schooners, and the late Harold Hand produced drawings for some of them too. For example, Edward Hawke. Yeah, don't ask me how I know about that one. I've had one in advanced stage of unfinish for the last 24 years. It is rolling around the shelf. By now, it has suffered severe damage in battle with the enemy. Top timbers have been shot through, etc., etc. It likely will never be completed. Anyway, but I like this little model, partially because I find miniature vessels fascinating, partially because it is a very minimalistic approach. There is virtually no paint. There is no playing with different colored woods. Very slight difference in the tinge of the timbers. The rig is in the typical classical ship modeling style of only the spars and some rigging, but without sails. I can see the point of doing it this way because if sails are not done properly, they look so unrealistic that they detract from the rest of the model. But in fact, I was strongly opposed to sails. They just looked plain ridiculous to my eye until I started seeing all sails. Okay, within certain context, I'm willing to admit that they might look good. Then there is a pair of sloops. Perhaps this is as good as any time to discuss the difference between sloop and cutter. It is something that frequently arises. Cutters have their main mast, well, their single mast, farther aft, almost to the midpoint of the keel, while sloops usually have their masts in the first third of the vessel. Cutters could run their bowsprit back in, usually had far less stave than sloops, could be completely brought in when shortening sail. They had an enormous fore and aft mainsails, which sloops did too, but unlike sloops, the cutters also had well-developed square rigged sails. Sloops are more, possibly, arguably, maybe more characteristic of the western shores of the Atlantic. Cutters were definitely widely used along the English shores, the British Isles. They were used for smuggling, they were used by the customs, and of course by the Navy. Sloops tended to be more commercial vessels. I would say the overwhelming majority of sloop models that we see, regardless what name has been slapped on their stern or on the label, are coming from Henrik Graf Chapman's drawings from his Architectura Navalis. And this one I suspect that it is no different, considering the rounded stern cabin, which is depicted also in Chapman. I'm pretty sure that's where the origin of it comes. A very definitely American type of vessel. These are the multi-masted schooners. And this is a very nice, very neat model. In fact, I was not aware that this is the only surviving hull of such a schooner. I did not realize that any were surviving. So it was educational for me to see it and to read the label. I have to admit that I see why they were built. They're cheap to construct, they're cheap to operate. They would not have been particularly good sailing boats, but they were not needed for any serious, important, long-distance, transoceanic, etc. hulls. They were never intended to go around the Horn, not with this rig, at any rate. So I do not find them particularly attractive, but I do find this model interesting, partially because it taught me something that I did not know. And the model of Confederacy is well built. I like it because it is a scratch-built vessel, and I love scratch-built vessels. True, we do have a certain number of them floating around, but so what? They are nowhere close to the same number of models as a Victory, Constitution, or God Between Us and Evil, even Bounty. So, I'm happy to see yet another one built. In this case, the framing is obviously stylized. It is following the Harold Hahn method of construction, I assume, although I do not know this for a fact, but it just looks like it. Beautifully done. I wonder if the modeler intends to rig her or will leave her on the stocks like this, which logically makes more sense, of course. If you have open framing below, it is a bit too much to see a ship under full press of sail. But I like this model, so this is right up there in the group of my favorite ships. She is quite pretty. She probably was a god-awful seaboat, considering how long and how shallow her hull is for the length. It seems to have been influenced, although this is pure guesswork on my part, but she does look similar to many of the French frigates, which were designed to develop very high speed to outrun the Royal Navy, but they really were designed to run downwind to get out of port, and hopefully that will be all they need to do. That's great when you're a shallow-hulled vessel, you can develop very high speeds. The problem, of course, is that once you have to beat into heavy seas and to keep the sea in any sort of weather conditions, then the shallow, flat-bottomed vessels are not doing nearly as well as the more traditional British, deeper-hulled style. The model of Essex, presumably following the Takatian drawings, is an example of this more typically Anglo-Saxon style of building frigates. Of course, we all know the detailed history, or rather, we all know the version that Porter chose to tell of his excavation. But let's put it this way, that if Oliver Hazard Perry reported capturing more brigs than the Royal Navy ever had on Lake Erie, Porter was not far behind him in making up stories. I do, of course, have his memoirs, but they frequently clash with Admiralty reports and other contemporary documents, and with all due respect to our flag and to the legend that has been built up around the Essex, I tend to believe the court-martials, the original documents, rather than the memoirs of Porter. Be this as it is, she did have an interesting cruise into the sea and traveled into oceans that prior to this no American naval vessel had sailed into. So at least from point of view of showing the flag and forcing more powerful and more capably led British frigate to chase him up and down the Pacific coast instead of being deployed elsewhere. So from that point of view, to some extent at least, the ship achieved its tasks. Needless to say, Porter, just like some of the other American officers, completely and blatantly ignored their orders in this process. They were supposed to wait and rendezvous with Constitution for creating a large squadron for the destruction of British trade that may have had some impact. Individually, Essex actually had absolutely no impact, economically, militarily, or in any other storm. But the captains, well, there is an American study of American Revolutionary War captains. Captains Cantankerous is the title of the book. I think that it would have been very appropriate for this period too. Glory to us, glory to our flag, and glory to the shipmodelers who built these beautiful works and displayed them in the USS Constitution Museum. It was a pleasure and a joy to see them. So thank you very much for the opportunity to see your work, and I'm looking forward to seeing the exhibit in New London later in April. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I think that I will bring our meeting to an end. I wish you a most wonderful rest of your day. Once again, my deepest gratitude and appreciation to the people, to the sponsors of this channel. Thank you. I salute you. I'm very grateful to you. See you soon.